Hello and welcome to another episode of Second Gen's Liberated Panda. My name is Victor Chen, and we are going to talk about the experience of being Black in China with Titi, a scholar from the Black China Caucus organization. Titi is an open source intelligence analyst at the US Department of State with expertise in international affairs and political analysis. Thank you for joining us today, Titi.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Victor.
I hope the introduction was all right, but I will start
That
off
was perfect.
I will start off by asking you to briefly introduce yourself and the Black China Caucus to our audience.
Sure. So for me, my name is Ogundele. Victor did a pretty good job with introducing me. In regards to my work with the Black China Caucus, I am their social media coordinator, and our mission is really to amplify Black voices in the China space. I think it's really important to spotlight this niche, community and really let it be known that we are very active in this space. And I think it would help with a lot of what we will be talking about today, kind of getting a little bit more, I guess the word would be maybe like educated on how, Black people are in the China space, culturally, politically, and, everything in between.
All right. That is fascinating. So how did you get interested in the organization and the field of US-China relations and foreign affairs in the first place?
Sure. So I'm actually the daughter of immigrants. My father is from Nigeria. Actually, both my parents from Nigeria. And, I've always had an international focus just in general, just because of that. What really got me into the China space was actually living in Taiwan. My father works for a company called Corning Incorporated. So we went over there. And, from there, I got, exposed to the language, the culture, and things like that, learning about Taiwan's relationship with mainland China. And, after doing Model United Nations as kind of an extracurricular, I really got into China and what was going on. So fast forward, I go to undergrad, I study abroad in Chengdu in Sichuan University, or Sichuan Daxue, as some will know it better as. And, just doing more language work, really trying to understand the US-China relationship, China and Africa, being African myself. And, it's been kind of the rest is history, if you will. So I'm here. And then in regards to BCC, just realizing there was more people like me, I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot more people in the China space than I realized in various ways. And what better way of kind of continuing that and encouraging more Black people to get into the China space? I think it's really important, that relationship, to continue fostering that through people just getting into the space.
That's fascinating. So like I said before, could you please just give us a really short introduction in Chinese, just to show off to the audience how, reminiscing you of the time you spent in Taiwan and China? So.
Yeah, sure. It's a little rusty, but, where do I start? 我的英文名字Titi，我学了中文在四川大学和 SUNY Albany 大学。现在我的爸爸住在台湾，在台中。我住了在台中。I'm having a hard time. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
It's rusty. I know. I gotta, 我的中文越来越坏，所以必须练习. I need to really study.
That was great. That was perfect. Diving into our first question, I would like to kick it off with a question relating to Black people in the city of Guangzhou. Since the internationalization in the 1990s, there have been many African traders and business people that moved to the Guangzhou area. Hence, a younger generation of biracial children was born as a result of an Afro-Chinese marriage boom. Some Chinese netizens are drawing the parallel between the Black immigration in Guangzhou and in France, especially Paris. And, the aggressive, offensive netizens are considering it an invasion. So what is your opinion on this?
It's a common fear, right? You have almost like this invader into a society that you don't really understand why they're coming and things like that. We have the same issue here in the United States, right? Like We feel that way about the, Mexican US border. We have that same idea, it's like this xenophobic kind of thing. So this isn't foreign to China. You know what I mean? Like this is happening in like you mentioned, like in France, things like that. I mean, with people coming from the Mediterranean areas and stuff. So this isn't new. Unfortunately, in my head, it's almost to be expected, simply because, you're in a situation where you have more or less homogenous society, and now you kind of have something that you don't really know much about. Obviously, the way that, Black people are portrayed doesn't help. So when you see like this, mixing, like people think it's like tainting, right? I think it's like tainting the purity of a race, which is unfortunate, but it's a theme we've seen over and over again. And I think, for me, because we've seen this scene over again, I mean, like one of the big examples being the Holocaust, there's so much that we should learn from those experiences, understand that this mixing of cultures is not a bad thing. And how to get that message driven home in Guangzhou, especially, is I think would be important. It's to everyone's benefit that we understand this isn't a bad thing of merging, if you will.
I completely understand that. There's also this conversation on, I would say contradiction, diversity that a country is trying to promote, but then on the other hand, they are trying to, well, like people say, like remain their own blood in that way. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to this contradiction between the diversity that people are striving for and the exclusion, people from different places are facing, if there has to be something perfect solution to this, what do you think should be happening?
I think there should be more, cross-cultural exchanges. I mean, we do that now. We have exchange programs. We have, international students studying abroad, getting more exposure. I think, the issue with racism, right? It's a combination of ignorance, fear, and hate, right? A lot of time it's taught. It's a generational thing. You don't just get born being racist. So I think it really comes down to the education and really understanding that, a firsthand experience is much better than like hearsay or what you see on TV. I mean, it happens with a lot of different groups, being otherized. And also what you're saying with contradictions, of being more diverse, but deciding which groups you want to be diverse with. It's like, that's not how that works. And I think it's really important to do more cross-cultural exchanges with groups that are kind of, kind of known for being ostracized. Like if we're seeing there's a problem with this particular race or this particular ethnic group, maybe there should be some type of program around more cross-cultural exchanges. Like I think that would be the thing, because education is really what it comes down to. It's like you need a firsthand experience or of source so that you can kind of dispel what you've read, heard, and seen, like not firsthand. So I don't know if that's the perfect solution. We are already doing that now, but I think it's really, really important for that to happen. And I think it's slowly happening, but of course, as we saw with COVID and things like that, there still is a lot of otherizing, if you will.
So for my capstone project in college, right, I did this documentary film called Racism in China, where I interviewed two friends of mine. One of them's Jamaican, one of them's from South Africa. And basically, he told me, the guy from South Africa, Bongani, he told me that when he was in China, he went to Huangshan, which is a famous mountain everybody goes to. And he knew that being Black in China would be a huge thing, but then he never knew it would be exaggerated like that. So he was on the mountains and people were just genuinely interested in him. They would go up to him and be like, "Oh, is your skin real? Can I touch it?" They wanted pictures with him. And then he was like, in the beginning, he got a kick off from it. He was like, "Wow, this is so interesting. I'm famous." But really, when that is something that's been happening every day, it got to a point where it is bringing anxiety instead of excitement for him. And moving on from there, although the Chinese government's announcement that addressed their zero tolerance on racism, discrimination against Black people in China is aggravating. So what could be the reasons for anti-Blackness in China? And, be it the discrimination on people with darker skin because it indicates agricultural work, or the generalization of certain criminal behaviors of Black people in China, or the white supremacy as the result of China's 100 years of shame and foreign subjugation, or the lack of education, like you just said, on foreign history, and linguistic problems that stem from ambiguous translation. So there are just many, many reasons that we could go to. And when it comes to differentiating ignorance and racism, what's your take on that? And can there be the reason for anti-Blackness in China, or they're just so complicated and it's a multi-part question?
Victor, I think you might have answered your own question. It is very multi-part. I mean, everything you said is exactly why that is, getting a little existential. Human beings learn from putting things in groups and kind of generalizing them to understand. I mean, it's not a horrible thing, but the problem with that is a generalization, right? And so, for example, here in the United States, they call, a lot of East Asians, Asians in general, really model minorities, right? This blanketed term that this is how all, Asians act, this is how all Chinese people act, which is not the case. You guys are not Chinese people are not a monolith, right? Like they are also a vast community. And so the problem with, the reasons why racism spreads because it's been generalized. If you see nothing but things about gangs and violence and all you see is black skin, you're automatically going to be like, all right, when I see this person, they look like the person on the TV screen. Is that fair? No. But if you don't have the exposure and then you see it, and then the first time you see it is like this, black man on a mountain somewhere, you're going to be kind of like, whoa, like we said, education, exposure is really, really important. But it is a multi-pronged thing. A government can say zero tolerance, but the government and the people are two different things, right? Like governments technically are supposed to represent the people, but how the people feel and how the government will feel will be very different. I mean, we have laws on the books here about certain things that in reality aren't actually put into practice. So it's really actually, if the government's saying that we have zero tolerance, then you really need to enforce that. Enforcement is so key because it's not fair, right? People want to go to China because there's opportunity, there's things going on. And you're discouraging that. But that's happening in a lot of different countries. There's this huge wave of kind of nationalism of getting the other out of here. And it's interesting because the different people are actually what's going to make you thrive and grow. I just wish that people knew that in the long term, it's much better for you to not hate over, indiscriminate things. And, it's bad for everyone involved, I think, to have that kind of continue. I actually had that experience when I lived in Taiwan in 2006 of people coming, I'm probably in a lot of people's Facebook profiles. I don't even know, the pictures, the touching of the skin, all these things. And it was like, my dad would say, they're just curious. And I was like, yes, but whether we are from different cultures with different languages, we know that's rude behavior. You wouldn't go up to someone and just start touching, it's rude behavior. So it kind of gets to a point of, you kind of feel like a side, like a show, if you will. When it's just kind of recognizing hey man, we're the same, different skin color, but the same. On the other hand, with, Africans and Black people in general going, or anyone going to any country, try to immerse yourself as well. Try to learn from them, to learn their language, really try, language barrier is a huge thing. I feel like there's so many, if it's a combination of, people and their governments really working hand in hand to kind of limit this gap of racism that's happening.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Like you were talking about, if all people see are just gangs and violence and in relation to Black people, then that's what they're going to have deep rooted in their mind. And that's not something we want to see. So speaking of generalization, the conversation reminds me of the recent tragedy of a female college student who was suspected to be murdered by a Black teacher. And it just got me thinking that, are the repetitive accusations on Black people, mostly associated with non-consensual sex and drugs and all of that, is that a representation of the public anxiety, or is this something that is actually happening?
That's a very good question. Trying to think how exactly I want to answer this. That what happened to that student is absolutely horrible, first and foremost. Condolences to her family. I mean, it's hard. It is really hard of that happening. And of course, it happening at the hands of, a Black person, it does feed into the see. We told you, like you let them in, they will do this stuff, which is so unfortunate. That it's almost like, see, this is happening. It's an example of that. And that's not the case. It's like, we have to have a little bit more nuance. Like this generalization is not going to work. You have to have nuance in looking at that. Like it can be true. Yes. Like this person is anyone's capable of anything. And so to look at the actions of one and let that penalize the whole community just isn't fair. And again, kind of like, how do we break that mold of people understanding that like we're individuals that are just different and we're not just all like representatives of our race? I think that's kind of the problem. Like Black people are basically, we represent our entire race whenever I'm just doing something singular, which isn't fair. I don't think other races really get that. And, kind of going back to your previous question about, is it white supremacy? It can be. I mean, right now the world is kind of made in the image of Western countries. So their culture, their ideas, they've permeated every culture, even if these cultures have maintained their own. I mean, the idea of Blackness being bad, like you said, darker skin means agricultural, you have skin bleaching products and makeup. I mean, it's really a thing of looking at Blackness as like evil when it doesn't have to be like that. There's so much history between, Black people in China just throughout history and even in the United States of like working together on many things. Like this isn't something that hasn't happened. It's just, how do we make more instances of that than what we are seeing,
Yeah, it's definitely something about exposure. Just for me, like use myself as an example, I spent my early life in China, and then I did not realize that I was a minority until I came to the US. And I think it was really about how you perceive yourself in the world and then how you operate around the world, like in the world that is around you. So with that in mind, how do you think we should differentiate between people disliking Black residents and people disliking what they imagine about Black residents?
So do you mean kind of reality versus like kind of like the idea of Black person versus the reality of Black people?
Yeah, I think going back to it is pretty much just the stereotypes people have already that's developed in China, and then how are we going to penetrate that barrier that is already there, that filter people put on Black people that are living in China, that are just trading, that are just minding their own business?
Right. I mean, like I said before, racism is taught. However, that's taught through parents, through the society. And I think it's just, for me, it's 2021. I think it's time for people to just, give people a little bit more benefit of the doubt nowadays. I mean, there's images of Black people doing horrible things on TV, but then there's also images of, Black people doing amazing things. Like it's the idea that we're either just one or the other isn't fair. And I think it's a matter of like someone asking themselves, like, how would you feel this was happening to you? Like you said, like you didn't realize you're a minority, so you came here. I'm sure you probably have your own stories of how that went, I mean, in every single way we all do. And, closing that gap, I mean, it's a multi-pronged effort. I mean, a lot of it does also come with like wanting, not just like getting education, like through government programs, but also educating yourself. The internet is a vast place to learn about these things. There's so many books, there's so much literature out there. Even right now with, China being in Africa, which is, a debatable issue in of itself, we're seeing that there are levels of cooperation between Black people in China. This idea that we can't, kind of coexist, I guess, it's like the fear of the other is really, it's high in every country. I mean, ours too, we just kind of we're still having kind of this movement of, kind of keeping America a certain way. And I think that is, for some reason, that's being permeated everywhere. I don't know if it's because of the leaders or just because there's just a backlash against foreigners. Like it happens, right? You have an issue, every so often where the foreigners are to blame and things. So like, I know I'm going a little roundabout with the question, but it's such a hard thing to think about how to really solve that. I mean, besides just more exposure, like, and I don't know, the best way of going about that between, individual people wanting to, because like, if you want to learn about something, you're going to do it. If you don't, then you won't. And so, can we cure racism in China against Black people? No, but we can definitely lessen it by showing more positive images of Black people. I mean, that's a huge thing. That's not sports. You know what I mean? Like, we're more than sports and all this other stuff. Like, we're smart people, just like everybody else. And those images needs to be shown. And shown at a relatively young age too. So people understand like, oh, okay, they're achieving things just like we're achieving things. Like, it's not like this horrible thing, but it's a part of me. It's hard for me to, obviously I can penalize racism, but the fact that, my experience here in the US, my experience in China are very different in terms of racism. I would say my experience in the US, much more active racism, a little more angrier and a little violent. China was more passive, getting ignored, being avoided, things like that, or just simply just gawking, I guess. So that's the thing. My experience, obviously, I never felt afraid being in China or Taiwan or anywhere else. But you can tell they don't like you. Some people don't like you and things like that. So I don't know. I think it's just, a lot of it is just exposure and just showing them more than what they're seeing right now, because a lot of it's just like, you see just like Black suffering through gun violence, through police brutality, and we're more than our tragedies. So I think it should be shown more that we're more than that.
Yeah, you were just talking about like being treated differently or like having different experience in the US and then in China. So that sort of transits to my next question. People say that racism are different, like the ones in the US could be more murderous, and the ones in China, they call it an explicit or subtle or whatever ways they call it. Do you think they could be different, or are they just inherently all just racism that needs to be erased?
Oh, it's all racism. I mean, it's all racism for sure. I mean, it's like, avoiding someone and pretending like they don't exist is almost just as bad as berating them for existing. Like I just said, my level of safety was much higher in a country that I'm not even from, where the language I had to learn. Whereas like, I was born here, and it's like, I knew very quickly that I was, not necessarily welcome. Now, that's not to say that every person everywhere I went was racist to me, but I've had moments of it could escalate to something more, or I've been called the slurs and things like that. In China, not so much. I think a lot of that is language barrier. Like, even if they did say something to me, like at the time, I wouldn't have understood, right? While studying Chinese. And it was a lot of avoidance. I don't know if it's because there's a fear though, too. Like I am not generally, but like people who are racist in China probably are still generally afraid of Black people. Racists here in the United States are not afraid of us because the racists here have a history of having power. So it's a little bit different. Whereas if I'm coming into your country and I'm like this person, you're like, I'm going to pretend like you don't exist. Also, you might be a threat, when that's not the case. I can be like the friendliest person, and they just have this idea. Both are rooted in ignorance and fear, irrational ignorance and fear. I would say on the American front, there's a lot more hate behind it. But obviously, as we saw, with the evictions and things like that of Africans in China, like, it can get violent. So it's, I don't know. It's they're all the same to me. It's like, if you're treating someone like subhuman, then it doesn't really matter if it's passive or active. It's still racism. I would just say the style is just the only thing that's different. But considering everything that happened during COVID, the style looks pretty similar. It looked very on par with what's happening here. So.
Yeah, I agree. You were talking about people on the internet, and then that was something I was writing about in my capstone project. That is, people on the internet, just because of the language barrier and also this bad linguistic like translation problems. I found people on the internet, they do this really bad thing where they refer to black people as the Chinese translation of the racial slur. So that is in the utterance of the word, although it is in Chinese, it is also the utterance of the racial slur in itself. And I just find that really ignorant and disrespectful because people come from a background where they do not understand, they do not know the history of slavery that people have gone through, and the utterance of the word on the internet is really just disrespectful. And with more people, with more black people in China, there are many of them that are just posting their daily cooking, their daily vlogs on basically Chinese YouTube or the websites there, and there are just people just hating them for no reason. And then when it comes to these kind of people who generalize black people on the misbehavior of just the certain individuals and show their superiority just in a really disrespectful way, what do you think we could do on the internet? Should we have more people taking care of the comment sections, or what should we do?
See, that's an interesting question because I'm also, I go back and forth with censoring and monitoring sometimes, because, especially, obviously, it's kind of like people should be able to be free to say certain things. But hate speech, I feel like is something that should be monitored simply because hate speech can lead to incitement of violence. And we have the same issue here. People get very bold and crazy when they're behind the keyboard. Some people say things just for shock value. Some people say things just to be seen. Some people say things to actually be violent, and it's kind of hard to tell between the two. As Twitter had banned former President Trump. While I don't agree with his politics, I found it like, oh, well, that's precedent for just being able to do that with any account. And that kind of got me worried a little bit too, with just in general. It's like, well, who governs the internet? Who is allowed to say what's okay and what's not? We obviously know racist remarks and that are not okay. I think that should be something that's flagged, some sort of algorithm that's able to flag hate speech. I think that's a good thing to develop. But when it starts getting into oh, I just don't like how you said that, or I don't like how you it's hard. But racial slur is 100%. Things like that should be kind of monitored for sure. But it's hard. That's a hard thing. It's I'm basically saying if we want to start censoring things, it's depending on the powers that be, they can censor all sorts of stuff. You censor someone from saying a racial slur today, and then you censor someone from protesting for something that is right. It's it can be very slippery slope. So that, I'm sorry, that's not the best answer, but it's very difficult to kind of think about how would you monitor that, because we have the same issue here. People say a lot of crazy stuff, and it's well, they're not threatening, so we can't really flag that. But if they say they want to do something, then maybe we'll flag that. It's I guess just having that type of person kind of looking at it and kind of being nuanced with it. But yeah, slippery slope, Victor.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky thing, because monitoring the internet and monitoring everybody that has account on internet and then have their freedom of speech to some extent in different places. It's just really hard. It takes a communal effort to educate people and have them understood that there are things that you just can't say, and then there are things that you can say, but in a really polite way, things like that. And
right, exactly.
So, like we said, it's really just about exposure and education. So, at least for me, I have hope, because I think I believe in education. I believe in the emancipation that education could bring. So I'm really looking forward to the more internationalized China in about 50 years, and how the younger generation by then who are ruling the nation, how they are going to think about these kind of things. But just on our way there, on our way of cruising toward a utopian kind of society where things are just better. It takes the effort of the government, the citizens, and the netizens. And we just really need all of them to be working together. So, like the government could be posing zero racism, zero tolerance for racism, but are they actually doing it? The citizens are the ones with more in-person, close contact with people on a day-to-day life. And what could they do in their daily language and interaction? And just for the netizens, basically how they generally behave on the internet. So with all of those happening, and then with all of those going towards, I think, a better place, what are you hoping for the future of Black scholars studying China and the traders and businessmen there?
Victor, just like you, I'm very optimistic. And I don't know if we're too optimistic or not, but I'm optimistic because, my being, having my experience in Taiwan, also living in China, I do have hope because generally speaking, my experiences were very good. I have very good friends still talk to, friends I've known now for over 15 years. We talk about these issues all the time. You know what I mean? Like it's about having the conversation the same way we have issues here in the US about, the white population educating themselves, but also educating each other, being an ally of helping a group, achieve equality means, looking at your own and saying, hey, you're a little racist. Here's how you should educate yourself. Because a lot of times, it's like crying wolf. If the oppressed is saying I'm being oppressed, the oppressor doesn't care. But if someone who is not being oppressed is saying, hey, these people are being oppressed, they actually might listen to that person, unfortunately, right? But that's important. It's like, sticking up for yourself as a Black person, but also having allies and things like that. And I feel like, I have a lot of, Chinese friends, Taiwanese friends, Hong Kongese friends like that, who do that, who understand that, like, this isn't okay. Like they talk to their own parents who might act like that. Cause a lot of it really is the older generation still educating the younger generation. But I think because of the internet and because of more exchanges, I haven't been to China, it's been 10 years. So I know that, I'm sure Chengdu has changed as a city. I'm sure that there's more Black scholars who have gone there. And so more people have gotten exposed. Like I'm hopeful because these things are still happening. Like none of this stuff is discouraging Black scholars and businessmen from still engaging with China. And nothing's discouraging Chinese people to also engage with us. So I think there's a larger group of people who are wanting to make this work than not. It's just a matter of constantly pushing the narrative and doing that. So I think, like you said, it's, netizens, government, and the citizens. I mean, it's all of us. It literally is a collective thing. Like racism doesn't just disappear from one segment. It literally is a constant group community effort.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like what we just talked about. It's a mutual understanding thing. I don't have any more questions for today, but before we head out, is there anything you want to say or?
No, honestly, this was great. I think this is a conversation that needs to be had all the time. I mean, what we can do together is so much more than what we can do apart. There's so much opportunity for growth there between, the Black community and China, or greater China as a whole. And I just hope that we decide to do that than to kind of regress, I think, there's a lot of misconceptions on both sides. And, I think it's time to dispel them and learn from each other, like genuinely care to learn. I think that's how we're going to get through this. And I think we're going to see a much more positive trajectory. I hope.
Yeah, I mean, we all hope that. And I do think that it's great that we're being optimistic about it. So thank you so much for coming in and having this conversation with me today. And it was absolutely great.
Thank you so much, Victor.
And for our audience, hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. And come back for us next week at the same time. Thank you.